At 34, Vivienne Holloway had everything a woman was supposed to want, and nothing she actually chose. Her name appeared on the Forbes list for the third consecutive year. Her firm, Holloway Capital, managed $11 billion in assets. She had a corner office on the 42nd floor of a building she partly owned, a car that cost more than most people's houses, and a reputation so sharp it made grown men straighten their ties when she walked into a room. What she did not have was a husband, and that, according to her grandfather, was a problem. Franklin Holloway called her into his study on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the same study where, 30 years ago, he'd signed the papers that built the Holloway financial empire from a mid-size regional bank into something that scared entire markets when it sneezed. He was 81 now. His hands shook slightly when he lifted his scotch, but his eyes were the same as they'd always been. Still, sit down, Vivienne. She sat. She did not cross her legs. She had learned early that her grandfather read posture like a balance sheet. "I've been talking to the board," he said. "Which board?" "Mine." He set down his glass. "The board that controls your trust." She felt something cold move through her chest, but she kept her face neutral. She was good at that. She'd been practicing since she was 12. "The terms of the Holloway Legacy Trust require a married beneficiary by age 35, he said. "You know this." "I know it's an outdated clause written in 1987 by a man who didn't believe women should run companies alone." Franklin smiled, and it wasn't warm. "That man built the company you run." "I know what he built." "Then you know what the trust contains." He slid a folder across the desk. 40% of Holloway Capital's voting shares, currently held in suspension. If you do not marry by your 35th birthday, those shares revert to the secondary line. Your cousin Philip gets them. Philip, who had once tried to sell the firm's real estate portfolio to fund a tequila brand. Philip, who wore boat shoes to board meetings. Vivienne looked at the folder without touching it. "You're serious." "I've never been anything else." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Manhattan went about its business, indifferent. "And I suppose," she said carefully, "you already have someone in mind." Franklin didn't answer right away. He picked up his scotch again, took a slow sip, and looked at her the way he looked at quarterly projections, with absolute patience and zero sympathy. "There's a man," he said. "His name is Reid Calloway." The name meant nothing to her. "He's a carpenter," Franklin added. "Lives in Millhaven. Has a daughter. 7 years old." Vivienne stared at him. "A carpenter," she repeated. "A very good one, from what I understand." "Grandfather." She kept her voice even, which took considerable effort. "I run an $11 billion investment firm." "You want me to marry a carpenter?" "I want you to marry a man who has agreed to the arrangement." Franklin set down his glass for the final time. "The wedding is in 6 weeks. The attorneys will handle the paperwork. You'll need to establish joint residence for at least 90 days to satisfy the trust's cohabitation clause." "Cohabitation clause?" She repeated his words as if they were in a foreign language. They might as well have been. "You'll move in with him. Millhaven is a 2-hour drive. Not unreasonable." "You want me to leave New York, temporarily, to live with a man I've never met?" "A carpenter, with a child. A very well-behaved child, from what I understand." He picked up his pen, which meant the conversation was over. "The arrangement will be kept private. Your public profile doesn't need to change, but the trust requires a real marriage, Vivienne, not a press release. You'll need to actually be there." She stood. She smoothed her blazer. She walked out of her grandfather's study with the folder under her arm and did not let herself react until she was in the elevator alone, doors closed, descending. Then she pressed her back against the wall, closed her eyes, and breathed. A carpenter. In a town called Millhaven. She looked up the name Reid Calloway on her phone before she reached the lobby. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no company website, no press mentions. A man who managed 11 nails didn't leave a digital footprint, apparently. She found a single review on a local contractor site. "Best work I've ever seen, built our whole back deck, extremely professional," and a photo of a porch railing that, she had to admit, was very well made. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then she called her attorney. The house was on Birch Hollow Road, at the end of a gravel driveway lined with oaks that hadn't finished losing their leaves yet. It was not the kind of house Vivienne was accustomed to. It was small and wood-sided and had a porch that clearly someone had rebuilt recently. The boards were new, the finish clean, the joinery exact. There were 2 Adirondack chairs and a child's rubber boot sitting alone on the top step for no apparent reason. She sat in her car for a moment. She was wearing her good coat, the charcoal wool one from Milan, because she had driven straight from the office and hadn't thought to change. Now she wondered if that was a mistake. She looked like she was arriving to acquire the property, not live in it. She got out. She knocked. The door opened, and Reid Calloway was nothing like what she'd expected, though she couldn't have said exactly what she'd been expecting. He was tall, wearing a gray thermal shirt and jeans with a streak of sawdust along the thigh. He had dark eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days, and the kind of hands that told you immediately what a man spent his time doing, wide across the knuckles, with a small scar along the left thumb. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Vivienne Holloway," she said, because someone had to start. "Reid Calloway." He stepped back. "Come in." The inside of the house smelled like pine and coffee and something that had been baking. It was small. A living room open to a kitchen, a hallway beyond. There were picture books stacked on the coffee table and a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator with a magnet that said Cape Cod. The couch had a throw blanket draped over one arm that had clearly been washed so many times it was soft past the point of texture. It was clean. That surprised her. She hadn't expected clean. "Do you want coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured it without asking how she took it, which struck her as either confident or inconsiderate. She decided to reserve judgment. "Your attorney sent the documents," he said, setting the mug in front of her. "I've read them, and I signed them." He sat down across from her at the kitchen table, wrapping both hands around his own mug. "I have conditions, though." She raised an eyebrow. "You have conditions. My daughter is 7. Her name is June." He said it flatly, not aggressively, but there was something underneath it. A line he'd drawn before she even arrived. She doesn't get told this is a business arrangement. She's been through enough. As far as she knows, we met through my grandfather, we're trying things out, and you're going to be staying with us for a while. Vivienne looked at him. What did she go through? A pause. He looked at his coffee. Her mother left when she was 3. It's just been us. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say to that, and she'd learned long ago that filling silence was a weakness. I won't make this harder for her, he said. That's not negotiable. Understood, Vivienne said, and she meant it, which surprised her slightly. He looked at her then, really looked, the way people rarely looked at her anymore, not at her title or her tailoring or her quarterly returns, but at her face. She resisted the urge to look away. Why did you agree to this? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Same reason you did, probably. Something I care about. She didn't push it. She picked up her coffee and drank it, and it was, she noted, very good coffee. That was the first thing. June Calloway came home from school at 3:15, dropped her backpack approximately 4 feet from where it was supposed to go, and walked directly into the kitchen without taking off her shoes. Dad. The art teacher says I can be in the winter show, but I have to practice, and She stopped. She looked at Vivienne, who was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her second cup of coffee, having decided that pretending to work was more comfortable than sitting in silence. Hi, June said. Hi, Vivienne said. June looked at her father. Reid was at the counter cutting an apple into slices, and he had the expression of a man who had thought about this moment and prepared for it, and was now hoping his preparation had been adequate. This is Vivienne, he said. She's going to be staying with us for a while. We're figuring some things out. June looked back at Vivienne. She was small for 7, with her father's dark eyes and her hair in 2 braids that had started the day neat and had not remained that way. She had a smear of blue paint on her left wrist. Are you his girlfriend? June asked. Vivienne glanced at Reid. Reid glanced at Vivienne. We're still working that out, Vivienne said. June seemed to find this acceptable. She sat down at the table across from Vivienne, propped her chin on both hands, and said, What do you do? I run a company. What kind? Financial. We manage money for people. June considered this. That sounds boring. It is sometimes, Vivienne said, but other times it's like a very complicated puzzle, and you have to figure out the right pieces before anyone else does. June tilted her head. I like puzzles. Me too. It wasn't exactly warmth, but it wasn't disaster either. Vivienne counted it as something. That night, she lay on the guest bed in Reid Calloway's small house, looking at a ceiling that was considerably closer than any ceiling she'd slept under in years, and listened to the particular quiet of a town with no traffic, no sirens, no neighbors she could hear through walls. Just the sound of someone, Reid, she assumed, moving around downstairs, the low creak of floorboards, water running, a door closing softly. She was still awake at midnight, old habit. The first week was careful. They were both careful people, as it turned out, and their carefulness functioned like a language they both happened to speak. He didn't ask her about work. She didn't ask him about the mother. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table because June expected it. And they talked about June's art project and the weather, and once, about what kind of wood was used to make the best outdoor furniture, which Vivienne engaged with more than she anticipated. She worked from the kitchen table during the day. He worked in the shop behind the house. She could hear the saw from where she sat, a clean sound, methodical, steady. On the fourth day, June came home and said her coat zipper was broken and Reid was in the middle of a commission and couldn't stop, and Vivienne, without entirely meaning to, said she'd take her to the hardware store to see if they could fix it. They stood in the aisle for 10 minutes before June found a replacement zipper pull that was shaped like a small bird. This one, June said definitively. That works. It's a sparrow, June informed her. Sparrows are my favorite because they look ordinary but they travel really far. Vivienne looked at the child. Who told you that? Dad. June held the zipper pull up to the light. He says most things that look ordinary aren't. Vivienne said nothing. She bought the zipper pull. On the way home, June asked if Vivienne knew how to braid hair because her own braids kept falling out by lunch. Vivienne did know how to braid hair. Her grandmother had shown her once when she was small, and so the following morning she sat on the edge of June's bed and braided her hair in two tight, even plaits that would actually stay. June looked in the mirror and then at Vivienne. These are better than Dad's, she said. I won't tell him. June grinned. It was the first grin Vivienne had gotten, and she felt something move in her chest, small and complicated. The trouble announced itself on a Monday morning, the way trouble usually did. Vivienne was on a call when the first text came in, her CFO Marcus with 3 words, "We have a problem." She stepped outside onto the porch, into the cold October air, and called him back. Drexler Capital filed a 13D this morning, Marcus said. His voice was tight. They've been quietly buying shares. They're at 9.8%. Vivienne went very still. Who's behind it? Front company. We're still tracing the structure, but the filing strategy looks like Everett Soane. The name tasted like bad medicine. Everett Soane had been a competitor for 12 years. He was meticulous and vindictive, and he had been trying to get a foothold in Holloway Capital since the year she took over. He was also, she now knew, exactly the kind of man who would have spent the last 3 months quietly doing the math on her trust clause and timing his move for the moment she stepped away from New York. He waited until I left, she said. That's what it looks like. She went back inside and spent the next 4 hours on calls, attorneys, the board, her securities counsel. She paced the kitchen, she paced the porch, she paced the gravel driveway, which Reid observed at one point from the doorway of the shop with an expression she couldn't read. By evening, she had a response strategy. By midnight, she had the framework of a counterfiling. By 2 in the morning, she was still at the kitchen table, and Reid came downstairs in an old sweatshirt and put a glass of water in front of her. You haven't eaten since lunch, he said. I'm aware. He made toast. He didn't make a production of it. He just put it on the table beside her laptop and sat down across from her with a mug of coffee, and, as far as she could tell, no intention of going back to bed. You don't have to stay up, she said. I know. He looked at her documents without asking what they were. Is it fixable? She looked up. How do you know something needs fixing? You've been outside 3 times in 4 hours, and you had the same look each time. She considered. Yes, she said. It's fixable. It's going to take work. Most things do. He sat with her until almost 3. He didn't offer advice. He didn't ask questions she'd have to deflect. He was simply there, in the way that some people knew how to be, not filling the space, just occupying it, which was its own kind of comfort. She noticed that. She filed it away in the place where she kept things she didn't yet know what to do with. She figured it out by accident, the way you often figure out the most important things. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks in. June was at a friend's house for the night, and Vivienne and Reid had the rare strangeness of a quiet house to themselves. They were eating dinner. He'd made pasta, and it was considerably better than she'd expected, which was becoming a theme with this man when he got a phone call. He looked at the screen, excused himself, and stepped into the hallway. She wasn't trying to overhear. She was pulling up an email on her phone. But the house was small, and his voice, though low, carried. Yes, he said. Transfer it directly to the Millhaven Children's Foundation account. The usual routing. A pause. No, I told you, keep my name off the announcement. That's not negotiable. Another pause. Because it doesn't matter who the money came from. It matters what it's used for. She set down her phone. He came back, sat down, and picked up his fork. Sorry about that, he said. Work? She asked, careful. Something like that. She was an analyst. She had spent 15 years reading between lines. She spent the next 48 hours being very quiet and very observant. She noted the call he took outside on Friday morning, the same low, precise voice, the same instruction to route funds through a numbered account she recognized as a structure used by institutional investors, not contractors. She noted the way he read the Wall Street Journal, not skimming, not casually, but with the concentrated attention of someone who was tracking something specific. She noticed the handshake he gave to a man who stopped him outside the hardware store. The way the man straightened almost imperceptibly, the micro-hesitation before he spoke, the kind of deference that doesn't come from social courtesy. It comes from hierarchy. On Saturday morning, while June was watching cartoons, she looked up his name again. Not Reid Calloway, the contractor. She searched Calloway in financial databases she had access to that most people didn't. She searched the Millhaven Children's Foundation. She searched the LLC structure of 3 holding companies that had come up adjacent to her firm in the last 2 years. Competitors who'd stepped back at precisely the right moment, as if someone had given a signal. And there it was. Holloway Capital Holdings, founded 2009. Managing partner, R. Calloway. Total assets under management, undisclosed. Last known public-facing action, the quiet acquisition of a 3% stake in Holloway Capital's primary competitor, Drexler, 18 months ago, a stake that had been liquidated 2 weeks after Vivienne arrived in Millhaven. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought about the Carpenter, the sawdust, the old sweatshirt, the toast at 2 in the morning. She thought about June saying he says most things that look ordinary aren't. She closed the laptop. She walked to the kitchen. Reid was at the counter making coffee, and he didn't hear her come in, or if he did, he didn't show it. Reid, she said. He turned. She looked at him, really looked, the way she had in the first meeting, except now she was looking for different things. Holloway Capital Holdings, she said. The coffee mug in his hand went still. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not embarrassment. Something more like exhaustion, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told to set it down. Sit down, he said quietly. I'm fine standing, please. He pulled out a chair. Please sit down, Vivienne. She sat. He poured 2 mugs of coffee. He sat across from her. Outside the window, the last of the October leaves moved in the wind. I built it in 2009, he said, after the crash. I had a background in structural engineering, not finance, but I had a very specific theory about how institutional money misread risk, and I spent 3 years testing it. He looked at his mug. By 2015, we were managing more than your grandfather's firm. She stared at him. I stopped putting my name on things publicly in 2017, he said. There were threats. People who'd lost money fighting my positions. I had June. I wasn't willing to be a target. He looked up. I moved here. I already knew how to build things. Carpentry was something to do with my hands while I figured out the next 20 years. Your grandfather, she said slowly. And my grandfather, he nodded once. They've known each other for 30 years. Franklin approached mine about the arrangement after your trust clause came up. My grandfather thought, he paused. He thought it might be good for both of us, to hide who you were, to see who we were without all the rest of it. He said it carefully, not defensively. I'm sorry I didn't tell you myself. I kept meaning to, and then he stopped. And then he looked at her with an honesty she hadn't expected from anyone in a very long time. And then I wanted more time. She was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Birch Hollow Road. June's cartoons played from the living room, a cheerful chaos of sound. You bought the Drexler stake, she said finally, and liquidated it when they moved on you. Yes, that took a 9-figure position. It did. She absorbed that. She was good at absorbing. Why? He looked at her. Because someone was trying to take something from you, and I was in a position to make it harder for them. She didn't say anything for a long moment. The coffee was getting cold. Neither of them touched it. I need a few days, she said. Of course. She stood. She walked to the hallway, then stopped without turning around. The joinery on the porch, she said. Did you build that yourself? A pause. Yes, it's very good work. She heard him exhale, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something in between. Thank you, he said quietly. She gave herself 3 days. She went back to New York for 48 hours, filed papers, sat in board meetings, did the work. Her attorney confirmed that the Drexler incursion had stalled, the counter-filing was solid, and the trust clock was ticking towards 6 weeks of cohabitation. She stood in her apartment on the 42nd floor and looked at the city and tried to feel like herself, and mostly she did, except for a specific quiet she kept reaching for. That wasn't there. She thought about June's braids and the Sparrow zipper pull and the way Reid made coffee at 2 in the morning without being asked. She thought about the expression on his face when she said his company's name. Not defensive. Tired. Like someone who'd gotten very good at being alone with a secret and had forgotten what it would feel like not to be. She went back to Millhaven. June was on the porch when she pulled up, sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs with a book open in her lap and her feet not quite reaching the floor. You came back, June said. I said I would. June looked at her with those serious dark eyes. Lots of people say things. Vivienne sat in the other chair. That's true, she said. But I'm not lots of people. June considered this. Then she looked back at her book. Dad's inside, she said. He made chili. He made too much, like always. He does do that. He does it on purpose, I think. So there's leftovers. Vivienne looked at the child. That's actually pretty smart. He's smart about a lot of things, June said. He just doesn't tell people. Vivienne smiled, and it wasn't the measured professional smile she used in boardrooms. It was the other kind, the kind she'd almost forgotten she had. She went inside. Reid was at the stove, and he heard her come in, and he turned around with an expression so carefully composed that it told her everything. He hadn't been sure she'd return, and he was trying not to show it, and he was failing slightly in the very best way. Hi, she said. Hi. He looked at her coat, then her face. You came back. June said that too. He turned back to the stove. She notices things. She does. Vivienne hung up her coat. She sat at the kitchen table. So, we should talk about what happens next. We should 90 days satisfies the trust clause. After that, we could structure a formal separation. Quiet, no press. You'd have no reason to stay in the arrangement beyond that. He stirred the chili. He didn't say anything. Or, she said, he went still, or we could stop treating it like an arrangement. The kitchen was very quiet. From the porch came the distant sound of June turning a page. Reid turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen of his small house on Birch Hollow Road, with sawdust on his sleeve and chili on the stove and 11 years of secrets finally put to rest between them. I should tell you, he said. I haven't done this well, any of it. The ordinary life, the ordinary house. June asked me once why we didn't live like other people, and I didn't have a good answer. Maybe the answer is different now, Vivienne said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the table and sat down, and the distance between them was smaller than it had been 3 weeks ago. Considerably smaller. "The Sohn filing," he said. "It's going to come back." He doesn't stop. "I know. I have 3 holding companies that can create enough structural noise to delay his next move by 12 to 18 months. That buys you time to restructure the trust shares permanently." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to help with that, officially." She tilted her head. "Partners, in whatever sense you're comfortable with." She looked at him, the carpenter, the billionaire, the man who made too much on purpose so there'd be leftovers. And she thought about how Franklin Holloway had never, in 81 years, done anything accidentally. "Both senses," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile yet, but it was close. 3 months later, in the boardroom of Holloway Capital, on the 42nd floor, Vivienne stood at the head of the table and presented the restructured ownership framework to 14 people who had spent the last quarter very confused about the source of Drexler's sudden strategic retreat. She did not explain the source, she explained the results. Everett Sowain's proxy effort had collapsed cleanly and completely, the way things collapse when someone who truly understands structural risk decides to apply that understanding in the opposite direction. The Drexler stake had been unwound. The trust shares were formally transferred into Vivienne's name, unsuspended, irrevocable. At the far end of the table, seated in the chair reserved for advisory guests, Reid Calloway watched her work. He was wearing a suit. It fit well. He had shaved. June had declared it an improvement when he'd left the house that morning, though she'd added, diplomatically, that she also liked the scruffy version. Vivienne concluded her presentation without notes, without hesitation, without a single qualifier or hedge. 14 people who had questioned her tenure over the years were very quiet when she finished. She looked at the board. Then she looked at the far end of the table. Reid was watching her with the specific expression she'd been cataloging privately for 3 months. The one she'd first seen when she said something blunt and true, and he looked at her like she was the most interesting thing he'd encountered in years. She had come to understand that this was simply how he looked at her. She gathered her materials. She nodded to the room. "We're done here," she said. They walked out together into the corridor, and when the boardroom doors closed behind them, Reid said very quietly, "June wants to know if we can get a dog." Vivienne looked at him. "She says a dog would complete the house," he said. "She's not wrong. She's usually not." He looked at her. "So, dog?" Vivienne Holloway, youngest female CEO in the Fortune 500, manager of $11 billion, woman who had never once made a decision she couldn't fully justify, said yes, and it was the easiest answer she'd ever given.